their book, Made to Stick, Chip and Dan Heath speak to the social communications barrier known as the curse of knowledge. And in their book, they're quoted as saying this: "Once we know something, we find it hard to imagine what it was like to not know it. And as a result, it becomes difficult for us to share our knowledge with others." Every one of us on some level suffer from the curse of knowledge, and we've been recipients of the curse that others suffer from as well, be it in a doctor's office, a lawyer's office, an engineer's office, or as in the case of my wife and I recently going through the financing process for a new home, our banker's office, where they just seem to be speaking this jargon that we don't quite understand. And our response across the board universally is, can you just give it to me in layman's terms? The curse of knowledge essentially is this: when we know something, it's hard to imagine not knowing it. And the curse of knowledge begins with the root of faulty assumptions. We assume that people know what we know, they believe what we believe, they think how we think, they understand what we understand, and therefore they're compelled to do what we do. In order to illustrate the curse of knowledge, the Heath brothers cite a 1990 study conducted by a Stanford PhD student. Essentially, the PhD student set up a table, and on one side of the table, she put tappers. Tappers wore headphones, and on the other side of the table, she put listeners. There were 120 familiar songs, such as the Star-Spangled Banner, or Merry Christmas, or Happy Birthday, or songs such as these that are wildly familiar that were playing in the headphones of the tappers. And it was the objective of the tapper to literally tap on the table so that the listener could rightly identify the song. Maybe you've played this game with your kids. My kids do it all of the time, especially this summer in the swimming pool. They want to go underwater, and they want to hum a song for me to listen to. And then we come out of the water, and they say, "Daddy, what song was it?" And I say, "I have no idea, sweetie," and they get frustrated with me. Why don't you hear the song that I'm humming the way that I hear it? Tappers failed to get the message across consistently. The interesting thing about the study is that out of 120 songs to be played, the tappers guesstimated that they would correctly tap 50% of the songs. Their guess on the front end was that the listener would correctly identify 50% of the songs that they're tapping. The result of the study was less than dismal. Only 2.5% of the songs were correctly identified. 3 out of 120 songs were correctly identified by the listener. The problem that was illustrated in the curse of knowledge is that the song playing in the heads of the tappers was incredibly difficult to translate into the heads of the listeners. The tappers have this knowledge. They have a song in their head that they hear loud and clear. And it's incredibly difficult for them to know what it feels like to not hear the song the way that they do. Now, the remedy to the curse of knowledge is to transform how you communicate the song that you hear in your head and to stop assuming that everyone else hears it the same way you do. Otherwise, you become an incomprehensible tapping in people's ears. No matter how loud or how hard you tap, they still won't hear it like you will. I'm reminded of this every time I travel internationally with Americans. Maybe you've been in these situations. Americans assume that if we talk louder and slower to people who don't speak English, then they will miraculously somehow understand English, right? And so you're in Africa or you're in South America, and people who don't speak our language are literally being yelled at by Americans in English because we assume that if we would just tap louder and tap harder, then they'll get it. They'll hear it. The result on both sides is frustration. On our side, why aren't you getting what I'm saying? On the listener's side, why are you constantly beating me over the head with the same annoying message? For many of you, if foster care were a song, it would be the soundtrack to your daily lives. You live it, you breathe it, you study it, you're entrenched in the struggle of these kids, you understand the brokenness of these families, you experience the heaviness of redemption on a daily basis. You think about it, you read books and blogs on it, you attend trainings and classes and conferences on it, and you are likely far more versed on all things foster care than the average person, particularly your pastor and your ministry leaders at your church. As a result, you can easily become unknowingly inflicted with the curse of knowledge. Perhaps our pastors and our ministry leaders aren't getting it because all that they hear is an annoying tap out of us. You have a song in your head, and you are compelled and albeit called and passionately committed to getting others to sing the same song of foster care that you yourself sing. Your vision for foster care at your church is probably bigger than the current level of involvement, and that's what makes it vision. But the question becomes, how do I get my church and my pastors and my ministry leaders to sing along with me? Many are frustrated because our pastors don't get it. How do we ensure that we don't become an annoying tap in their ears? Bail to another church? Aggressively force the issue? Or just lose hope and give up? Real quickly, I'd like to suggest 5 ways to remedy the curse, to reframe and reposture our communication in order to more effectively communicate and teach the song of foster care to those who don't yet know it. Number 1, be prayerful. Pray for a movement. Don't push an agenda. Pray for your pastors and your ministry leaders. Pray that God would draw them to areas of Scripture that address the church's call to care for the marginalized, and that they would read these Scriptures in a new and profound way. Be prayerful. Number 2, be faithful. Demonstrate the necessity of involvement through your actions, not just your words. Teach them how to sing the song you sing, but don't teach them necessarily the words. Show them what it looks like in practice. Continue to be obedient to your call and lead by example. It's likely that your pastor's understanding of foster care is exclusively determined by what he sees in you. You are the textbook of foster care that he's reading. Be faithful. Number 3, be humble. Don't try to implement something good in your church by pointing out all that is bad in your church. It's just a bad method to get your way. Maintain a posture of humility and respect. Don't be belligerent and critical. Number 4, be helpful. Again, you are likely far more versed on the issues of foster care, books and conferences, symposiums. You have a passion, and you've given hours of your life and literally your family and your home to it. Don't use your knowledge as ammunition, but as encouragement. Place it as kindling around the heart of your pastors and ministry leaders, and pray that God would burn that fire out of control. And then finally, be patient. Be realistic. Don't expect things to change overnight. This is not a peripheral ministry that we're talking about. We're talking about eternally affecting change in the lives of kids and families forever. And so it is worth the long and hard work that will be required of us. In closing, I discussed this with a friend recently, and he asked this question. As we encourage others who feel like their pastor doesn't get it, let's turn the tables for a moment on them and ask this. What does your pastor do with you when you don't get it? I love that question, and likely if he or she is a good pastor or leader, he is prayerful, faithful, humble, helpful, and patient towards you, and so should we be towards them. In the end, be less concerned about whether or not your pastor is behind you, and trust that God has gone before you.